Is this on?
Hello, I'm Stevie Nix, and welcome to On The Record, the podcast where we get to learn a little more about our favourite artists from someone who should know, the artists themselves. Today we're going to listen to John Lennon, but here's the thing, it's already been done. That is, anyone who has seen Andrew Salt's brilliant documentary Imagine, which came out in 1988, has already heard Lennon tell his story. So I figured I could do one of two things here. Just play you the audio from the documentary, but there might be a couple of copyright issues with that, or I could just go to one source. And the source I chose to go with was the BBC, which recorded Lennon's last interview on December 6, 1980, just 2 days before he was assassinated. The interviewer was Andy Peebles, and for reasons best known to himself and his producers, he steered completely clear of the Beatles. Actually, come to think of it, that may well have been a stipulation of Lennon's agreeing to do the interview. Anyway, whatever the reason, this interview begins with John and Yoko first meeting on November 9, 1966, and it works its way chronologically to November 17, 1980, the day that Double Fantasy came out. Now, there may be next to no Beatles in this story, but there is still a lot of Lennon and a lot to talk about, including when he first wanted out of the Beatles, and it was well before Let It Be, the Plastic Ono Band, his iconic first solo album, songwriting, thoughts of returning to England, meeting and working with Elton John and David Bowie, Phil Spector, signing off in 1975, what he did for the next 5 years, what made him return to recording, and heartbreakingly, what the future held in his eyes. And then there are the songs, Give Peace a Chance, The Ballad of John and Yoko, Instant Karma, Imagine, Number 9 Dream, Mind Games, and this one.
It's been so long since we took the time. No one's to blame. I know time flies so quickly. But when I see you, darling, it's like we both are falling in love again. It'll be just like starting over. Just like starting over.
He goes into great detail on all of these subjects and a couple more. So if you want to know everything there is to know about John Lennon once he quit the Beatles, well, this interview is the one to listen to. The interview itself stretched on past 2 hours, and the BBC broadcast it in 4 instalments. But I'm going to give you just the highlights, which means a lot of what Yoko has to say, because she, as always, was sitting right next to Lennon, well, it doesn't make the cut here. Nothing against Yoko, I simply wanted to focus on Lennon. Now, it's hard to think of December 1980, think of Lennon, and not think of 4 fatal gunshots. But just 2 days earlier, as Lennon decamped at the Hit Factory, where he had recorded Double Fantasy and was now working on Yoko's single Walking on Thin Ice, well, the mood was buoyant. Lennon had been a recluse for the past 5 years and was said to be nervous the day before the interview, but he didn't pull out. He knew the game, even if he had been out of it for a long time. He had a record out, he loved it, was audibly enthused by the excitement it was generating, and once he sat down with Peebles, well, he was eager to talk. And all nerves went out the window once the tape started rolling. Peebles lets Lennon ease his way into the interview with a nice Dorothy Dixer, a subject both he and Yoko are twin authorities on. the day they first met. Here's Lennon.
Oh, it's a long story. Yoko had
Met
come...
with a smash.
Yeah, had come to London, or had been invited to London by some group of artists or something called Destruction in Art Symposium. They had some big thing going on in London. And she had an exhibition put on by that gallery. What was it called?
Indica Gallery.
Indica Gallery, Marion
By
Faithfull's...
John Dunbar.
John Dunbar, Marion Faithfull's ex-husband.
Mm-hmm.
I used to go down there occasionally. I'd been down to see things like Takis, who'd made these flashing lights and sold them for a fortune, you know, it'd be garbage. But they sent me this pamphlet, or he called me, I don't know which, about this Japanese girl from New York was going to be in a bag, you know, doing this event or happening. I thought, you know, sex. So I went down, and it was quite funny because I had a chauffeur-driven SS Cooper Mini with black windows. You know, the chauffeur was about 8 foot tall, and the Mini drives up, a giant guy gets out and opens the door, and I go in, and it's the night before the opening.
And I was in the basement.
She was in the basement. There was nobody there. I was thinking,
Just in the basement, not in the bag?
No, she wasn't in the bag, so I go in.
I was just preparing, you know, it was before the opening.
There was, you know, like a few nails on a stand and an apple on a stand, cosmic, and just these strange-looking objects, just looked like found objects that had been painted white with little messages written on them. John Dunbar sort of showing me around. I'm looking, thinking, I said, what? How much is that? You know, £100 for a bag of nails? Are you kidding? How much is the apple? £200?
Fresh apple.
Oh, fresh, thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
right.
£200 for a fresh apple? I thought, this is a con. What the hell is this, you know? I go downstairs, and there's a few sort of... There must have been assistants, but I thought there was a minimal audience lying around on the floor. Anyway, but Dunbar's trying to hustle a bit because he thinks the millionaire Beatles are coming to buy, you know. So he introduces me to this strange-looking Japanese woman. Nothing's happening in the bags. I'm expecting an orgy. In a bag, something's going to be happening in a bag, you know, psychedelic. And it's all quiet. And he introduces me to her. And I said, well, where's the sort of happening, the event? And she gives me a little card. And it just says, breathe on it. So I said, you mean like that? She says, yeah, that's it. So I'm looking for action, you know, and I see this thing called hammer and nail in. It's a board with a chain and a hammer hanging on it and a bunch of nails at the bottom. I said, well, can I hammer a nail in? She says, no. So John Dunbar whisks her away. I said,
Because it was before the opening, you know, I didn't want anybody to touch anything.
Right.
So he takes her in the corner and says, that's a millionaire. Oh, you know who that is? She didn't know who I was. You know.
He didn't explain anything,
Well,
really. He was just sort of trying to hint, you know, with his eyes.
Or whatever. She came over and said, you can hammer one in for 5 shillings. I said, I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in, all right? And that's when we fell. Da-da-da-da-da.
It was as easy as that, was
Well, but it took 18 months, 2 years before we really got together.
Do you remember what sort of...
With that out of the way, Lennon is feeling a lot more comfortable. And when talk turns to the movie he made in 1967 with director Dick Lester, How I Won the War, Lennon said that this was when he first had thoughts of breaking up with the Beatles. I'll let him tell you why.
Well, it wasn't so much the
Oh, I
pressure, it was
didn't
the
know that.
boredom, you know. After the Beatles' last tour, which was 65, I think, was the one where the Ku Klux Klan were burning Beatle records and I was held up as a Satanist or something, then we decided no more touring, that's enough of that. I'm not going to put up with it. And I was dead nervous, so I said yes to Dick Lester, that I would make this movie with him. I went to Almeria, Spain for 6 weeks, because I didn't know what to do. You know, what do you do when you don't tour? There's no life. Because I've been on the road for...
And that meant a lot to you, didn't it?
Well, it wasn't that I wanted to tour so much, but I didn't know what to do. What the hell do you do all day, you know? I mean, so I did the movie, which was boring as hell, and 6 weeks there. But I was really too scared to walk away. I was thinking, well, this is like the end, really. You know, there's no more touring. That means there's going to be a blank space in the future at some time or other. That's when I really started considering, what can one do? Considering the life without the Beatles, what would it be? And I spent that 6 weeks thinking about that. What am I going to do? You know, am I going to be doing Vegas? I call it now, but cabaret. I mean, where do you go? You know. So that's when I started thinking about it, but I could not think what it would be or how I could do it, or I didn't consider forming my own group or anything because it didn't even enter my mind. Just what would I do when it stopped?
Peebles then asked Lennon about the first song that he wrote with Yoko in the title, the Ballad of John and Yoko. It's credited as a Beatles track, but in fact only Lennon and McCartney played on it. The drums you hear are played by McCartney.
the dock at Southampton, trying to get to Holland to France. The man from the Max said, you gotta go back. You know they didn't even give us a chance. Christ, you know it ain't easy. You know how hard it can be. The way things are going, they're gonna crucify me. Caught the early train into Paris, honeymooning down by the Seine. Peter Brown gonna say, you can make it okay. You can get married in Gibraltar and Spain. Christ, you know it ain't easy. You know how hard it can be. The way things are going, they're gonna crucify me. Drove from Paris to the Amsterdam Hilton, talking in our beds for a week. The newspaper said, say what you doing in bed. I said, we're only trying to get us some peace. Christ, you know it ain't easy. You know how hard it can be. The way things are going, they're gonna crucify me. Saving all your money for a rainy day, giving all your clothes to charity.
Lennon begins by talking about the track, but then starts discussing Yoko being in the studio and the reticence that the other Beatles felt towards this. What he doesn't concede is part of the reticence, resentment even, was born out of the fact that up until this point, no other person, girlfriend or otherwise, was allowed in the studio when the Beatles were working. Lennon broke the rule without first checking with his bandmates. Anyway, here's what he had to say.
Let's move to June 1969, and the Ballad of John and Yoko went to #1 in Britain and was top 10 in this country. Did that give you a feeling of satisfaction and of achievement, that you got a great success?
We never thought of it.
I never thought about it. No,
well,
I didn't even remember it was
remark,
#1.
Isn't it?
No, it was just, we were in
We were
Paris.
so busy doing things.
We were, that period we were doing films, records together
Bed-in.
with the Beatles, bed-ins, and it was just
But did you
quite
want
crazy.
did you want to detach yourselves as two people? I mean, you
No, because the
mentioned that you
Ballad
were
of
still
John and
doing-
Yoko was... Paul and I made that
Right,
record.
right.
He played bass and drums, and I played guitar and sang.
And in the back of your mind, was there a feeling that John and Yoko by this time definitely wanted to go their own way and create their own
No, we
music?
didn't think of it like that. It
No.
wasn't definite like that. We were just so busy and involved with things that we were doing. And we got so inspired every minute, And so maybe it just sort of took a natural course.
Yeah, had the Beatles been less tense about it, there probably would have been some... There was a couple of jam sessions in Let It Be with Yoko and the Beatles playing, but they never got in the movie, of course. But I understand it all now, but then we said, well, she just
That was
wanted
a
to join in
fantastic
everything.
Jam,
Just
So-
join in whatever was going on. So we had no conscious thing about, well, we're here and they're there. We were just making music. I don't know whether they were conscious. I think looking back, you understand there'd be 4 guys very close together, and the women that we were with then, wives or girlfriends, had been the old-fashioned type of female that we all know and love, the one that was in the kitchen all the time with the baby, and she never came to the sessions even. You never saw the wives, only for openings when they did their hair, And suddenly we were together all the time, sort of in a corner, mumbling and giggling together and doing Two Virgins and Bags. And then Paul George and me could think, what the hell are they doing? What's happened to him? And my attention completely went off them. Now, it wasn't deliberate. It was just like, I was so involved and intrigued with what we were doing. And then we'd look around and see that we weren't being approved. But I understand how they felt, because if it had been Paul or George Ringer that had fallen in love with somebody, got totally involved suddenly, it wasn't like, George coming in and saying, I'm going to work with Eric Clapton in a band now and screw you. It wasn't that kind of thing at all. It was just suddenly this
involvement. It wasn't in
involvement.
our consciousness at all.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed because I didn't know anything about England, really. And I was always in New York, so to speak. And to me, he was just another Englishman. I didn't know about the Liverpool and that, all that sort of thing.
Just another Englishman.
Well, you know what I'm talking about. And just sort of, the first impression I got from him was he's sort of handsome and sort of nice and tender, I thought. But anyway, so I didn't know about all these macho trip, that they
The
were...
Beatles officially broke up on April 10, 1970, but as anyone who has been through a bit of divorce will tell you, the end date is just the beginning of the strife. And so it was for Lennon, McCartney, George Harrison and Ringo Starr. Lennon and McCartney couldn't even be in the same room together, and Lennon needed an escape, a safe haven. He owned a mansion set on 72 acres in Tittenhurst Park, but even that was not sufficient to shield him from all the bickering. So on August 31, 1971, he and Yoko jetted out to New York, never to return as it happens. But he didn't know it then, or in December 1980. Here's what Lennon had to say when asked if he ever thought about returning to his homeland.
Oh, yeah, but as I always say to any Englishman I meet, most English people I meet are expatriates, I mean, as I was saying off stage before, I've been to Singapore, Hong Kong, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and all points east and Caribbean and Pacific places where Somerset Maugham and all those people that I like to read and read about were, and the famous place in Singapore, the Hotel Rattles or Ruffles or something, where they'd all been.
Raffles, yes.
So as Churchill said, it's the Englishman's inalienable right to live where the hell he likes. So, and as I say to an Englishman, say, well, don't you get homesick and come back? I say, what do you think? It's going to vanish? It's not going to be there when I get back?
But he's very English at heart. And I mean, just this morning, it was just this coincidence because we're meeting you now and, this all very English thing. And he saw this Liverpool in his book and he started choking up, really, oh, Liverpool.
That's supposed to be tough,
Yeah, I know what you mean. The combination is very peculiar.
But
the macho side and the other side.
It's a traditional English thing from Drake or whatever on to go everywhere, But I do find myself in English parts of the world, and it's very interesting.
Do you have many English friends in New York at the moment, John?
Well, as the Moonlight on the Water song says, no friends and yet no enemies. I'm either working or family-oriented. I don't do a lot of socializing with people of any nationality. And offhand, I can't think of anybody, English or American, that I particularly hang around with. We've been self-involved since we met, and we're totally self-contained.
Self-contained.
I mean, when Elton or Bowie or Mick are around and we're in the mood to mix, we see them, they're English, right? I forget. You see, I don't always divide people into nationality, I mean, it's just Bowie's in town now doing Elephant Man.
Yeah, we saw it last night.
I haven't seen it, but I would consider him a friend or acquaintance. I don't know how close you'd put it, because I've worked with him and we both know him. So in that respect, the rockers that come through, I see them.